There are moments when the justice system doesn't fail quietly, it fails in plain sight. In 1995, Lamar Johnson was sentenced to life in prison for a murder he did not commit. No forensic evidence, no confession, just one eyewitness, a man who said that he saw the killer's face in the dark. For nearly 3 decades, that claim stood, until a circuit court revisited the evidence and discovered how darkness, fear and suggestion turned human memory into a weapon. It's a chilling lesson in how the justice system can mistake a frightened man's certainty for truth, and how one simple mistake in the dark stole 3 decades of life. But to understand how Lamar Johnson lost 30 years of his life, we need to go back to the moment that the shadow took shape. On a silent porch in St. Louis, darkness settled, and something irreversible began. Marcus Boyd and Greg Elking sat quietly outside of Boyd's apartment. Behind them, a stairwell climbed into the shadows. Inside, Boyd's girlfriend, Leslie Williams, thought she heard some fireworks. Then she realised it was gunfire. She froze halfway down the stairs. Below, a masked man stood over Boyd, firing a gun. Another figure loomed beside him. No words, no warning, just the mechanical rhythm of violence. At 9:07, Williams called 911. Boyd was rushed to hospital, but pronounced dead within the hour. 2 masked men vanished into the night. Williams saw the act, but not the faces, and in that void, the justice system filled in the blanks. As later, detectives questioned Williams. She was clear both shooters wore masks, but she could not describe them. Days later, James Elking came forward. He described 2 masked men in dark clothing, one short, one tall. Details uncertain, filtered through fear. Yet the detectives built a case from those fragments. Detective Joseph Nickerson showed Elking a photo array which included Lamar Johnson. Elking claimed he could see the shooter's facial features despite both men wearing masks. Yet Elking refused to sign the photo to confirm that Lamar was the shooter. That very same night, Elking viewed 2 lineups. In the first, he identified the wrong man, and in the second, he identified no one. But later in the hallway, away from the procedure, he changed his story. He said the shooter was Johnson and Phillip Campbell. No explanation as to why he had changed. There was no real certainty, just fear, suggestion and police pressure. But here's where everything went wrong. As Detective Nickerson was to later claim, Lamar Johnson confessed by his own words. According to Nickerson, Lamar said, "I should have let the white guy live." Well, what's missing here speaks louder than what's written, because there's no video evidence, there's no audio of him saying that, there's no signed statement from Lamar himself, only a detective's recollection, and memory alone should not decide guilt. At trial, the prosecutors offered no motive, no physical evidence, just one witness. Later, the prosecution admitted that the case was iffy, but apparently iffy was enough to convict. Johnson was sentenced to life for the murder he did not commit. Now, this leaves a haunting question. Was the theory built to fit the witness, or was the witness shaped to fit the theory? Because years later, Elking recanted under oath. He admitted he never truly saw the shooters and that he had lied. When he identified Lamar Johnson as the shooter, the judge noted that the description Elking gave was skin as dark as the hood itself. Well, that description didn't match Johnson's lighter complexion, and this raises a significant question. Why did Elking lie? Well, the state had offered him money, relocation and protection for his testimony. Elking was struggling financially. He had been financially incentivised by the police. Truth had been brought here, and then came the direct proof. 2 men, James Howard and Phillip Campbell, confessed to murdering Marcus Boyd. They admitted that they killed Boyd, and it wasn't Lamar Johnson. Let's zoom into that because Campbell's statements date back in 1995. The truth had been ignored all along and buried. When Lamar Johnson's case returned to the circuit court, the judges did what the original jury never had the chance to do. They examined the evidence under the light of reason, and what they found was a case built on sand. First, Elking testified that the shooters were black men in dark clothing and masks covering all but their eyes and foreheads. The only light that came was from the stairwell above. It was faint, indirect, and nearly useless for identifying anyone. Still, the prosecutors argued that Elking could recognise facial features, while the circuit court disagreed. You cannot identify what you cannot see. Elking simply could not see enough to identify the facial features of the two men. What Elking saw was the shape of violence, but not the face behind it. And another detail that stood out was Leslie Williams' claim that Lamar Johnson had a lazy eye. This became the cornerstone of identification of Lamar as the shooter. The jury was never given any medical description for a lazy eye, nor were they shown evidence of it. They simply accepted the claim because it was delivered with such conviction by the prosecution. But when the circuit court revisited the evidence, they found nothing of the sort. Line-up photos did not reveal the supposed asymmetry. There were no medical records to support the claim. Correctional staff had never documented such a trait, and the court spent 5 days observing Lamar Johnson. There was no lazy eye, there was no slanted gaze, no physical marker to match the accusation made by Williams. And it was that very detail that convicted Lamar. But the fiction didn't end with the lack of a diagnosis of a lazy eye, because the next step in the prosecution's case wasn't about evidence. It was about reinforcement. Later that night, Detective Nicholson escorted James Elking to view a live lineup. Elking was anxious, visibly shaken, according to Nicholson's own report. Elking repeatedly asked whether the men behind the mirror could see him. Nicholson assured him they couldn't and stayed in the room throughout. The lineup began at 9:56 p.m, less than 8 hours after Elking had already been shown the photos of Johnson and Campbell. The live lineup included only 4 men. Johnson was the only one who appeared in both photo arrays and the live lineup. That overlap wasn't neutral. It suggested a conclusion. It hinted at who the police believed was guilty. The circuit court reviewed the lineup photos and they could not find any facial regularities. There was no sign of a lazy eye. There were no slanted features. Nothing to support the prosecution's claim. No medical expert testified to confirm the condition of a lazy eye. No one from the Department of Corrections validated it. The court saw Johnson with its own eyes. The feature simply did not exist. Here we have a witness already traumatised who was guided by repetition and presence, not recognition. The lazy eye wasn't a fact, it was fiction, and that fiction helped to convict a man. The circuit court went further in its assessment. Elking was white, the shooter was black. Elking did not know Johnson. He only saw masked figures in near total darkness. Now, cross-racial identification are some of the most error-prone in all of law, even in good lighting. This was not a face-to-face identification. It was a face-to-mask in near total darkness identification. Elking was clearly terrified. A gun was pointed at him and he watched someone close to him die. His certainty only came after repeated lineups, police pressure and emotional exhaustion. From "I can't identify anyone" to maybe number 4. Each step reflected survival, not memory. And then there was the jailhouse informant, William Mock, who was housed 2 cells away from Lamar. He claimed he overheard Lamar Johnson confessing to the crime. He never saw Johnson, didn't know his voice, but assumed that the words were his. At the time, Mock had undisclosed convictions and pending charges that would have undermined his credibility. Certainly the prosecution's failure to reveal this violated Brady versus Maryland, a clear breach of due process. Well, the Circuit Court concluded there was police interference which tainted Elking's identification. Key evidence included payments and benefits to Elking, which included an offer of witness protection. All this was withheld from the jury. Elking was clearly financially struggling. The court noted this and, combined with the police pressure, likely influenced his testimony. And then there was Mock's Jailhouse testimony, which was clearly inadmissible and a breach of fair process. The Circuit Court found Lamar Johnson's conviction could not stand and he was fully exonerated. After years of silence, the court finally spoke. Lamar Johnson was denied due process and a fair trial, including the most basic protections that law is meant to guarantee. James Elking testimony wasn't simply flawed, it was shaped under pressure, sustained by payments and presented as truth. This case asks a haunting question. What happens when the justice system chooses certainty over clarity, when prosecutors pursue conviction over truth? The darkness that night didn't just conceal killers, it blinded the law for nearly 3 decades. Stories like this reveal how fragile justice really is, and if you believe truth deserves a voice and no one should lose decades of their life to a lie, subscribe and stay with us as we uncover more cases like this. For now, take care.